I'm Ron Machoyan. Thank you, Carmen. I'm the International Safety and Security Director here at UW-Madison in the International Division, and also a senior lecturer in International Studies. I see many of my students and former students among you, so I appreciate all of you showing up, maybe a little bit of support there. Um, I first want to thank our sponsors because these sorts of programs don't come completely free, even though obviously it's pretty inexpensive, of course, now being done virtually and delivered online. But the International Studies major has sponsored us. The Middle East Studies Program, MESP in IRIS, is one of our sponsors. The African Studies Program and the Institute for Regional and International Studies, where Carmen is located, which is a national resource center and provides outreach and support. This is sort of a little paid announcement here. I feel like I'm on a baseball game where they go through the sponsors at the beginning, right? But outreach provides outreach and support, enhances international and global awareness, and inspires informed thinking about the complexities of our world. IRIS NRC outreach provides resources and expertise to K through 12 teachers and students, post-secondary educators and students, and the community at large as well. So I want to give a real sincere thank you, warm thank you to all of our sponsors, International Studies, again, Middle East Studies, the African Studies Program, and IRIS NRC as well. Uh, I'll be your host today, and I want to thank Carmen once again, also Leslie Bartlett, the faculty director at IRIS, and of course, the vice provost and dean of the International Division, Guido Podesta, whose leadership at the International Division makes all of this, all of our events and programming possible, and we really appreciate his support throughout the year. So today, what we're going to do is start off with Lily Dalton and Tristan Tafala, our guests, and I'll introduce them in a few moments here. And it'll be sort of a little bit of an informal interview where I just sort of draw out a little bit of the information that I think they would like to share with you and that we're interested in putting before you for our purpose today, tell you a little bit more about especially the Department of State generally and some career paths that may not be obvious to everyone, and especially the Diplomatic Security Service or the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. And then from there, we'll open it up to question and answers at the end. So if you have a question for either Lily or Tristan, just if you could put those in the chat, type them out in longhand for us, and I'll try to grab those once we start questions with Tristan and Lily, and we'll try to move our way through those. We'll leave plenty of time for your questions and hopefully get them all answered. If there's something that we don't get to, I can always put them to Tristan and Lily privately and try to find you a good answer and that we can email to you as well. So I'll introduce Lily, is the program manager at the Africa Desk in the Programs, Partnerships, and Policy team at OSAC, the Overseas Security Advisory Council of the Diplomatic Security Service at the U.S. Department of State. Tristan is the Director of International Risk at Columbia University in New York City, and he's my counterpart there. But the reason he's with us really today is primarily due to his past work experience as a special agent and an assistant RSO, regional security officer, in the U.S. Embassy structure with the Department of State's Bureau of Diplomatic Security. He served in Israel and the West Bank, and then with temporary duty assignments in Afghanistan and Yemen as well. So we're pleased to have both of you with us. I'll tell you from the beginning that Tristan and Lily are both, and they'll shirk at this probably and check out, but are both personal friends of mine. And they've indulged me by joining us today. And I personally really and sincerely appreciate them coming to Madison, even virtually, and helping me out, and also presenting a little bit about their backgrounds to you. So Lily, we'll start with you, kind of an open-ended question. Now that the introductions are done, tell us about Overseas Security Advisory Council, OSAC. I didn't know much about OSAC until I started working in this role at Madison. I doubt that many of our audience do as well. It's a part of the State Department, but yet it's a separate entity. And then if you could continue into your own path to OSAC and a little bit about your daily role and what, the path that you've taken, as well as what opportunities are available to you there. And if you forget, that was kind of a really general long-winded question to open up with. If you forget all of that, I'll keep prompting you and pestering you until we get every part of that out. So go ahead, Lily.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Ron, and thanks again for having us today. Looking forward to speaking to everyone and answering questions. And I could go on about OSAC for quite a long time. Sometimes I give 30-minute presentations about what OSAC is, but of course today I'll try to keep it brief. But of course, if you have follow-up questions or if I use any acronyms you don't know, please do stop me. So as Ron kind of introduced it, OSAC, or the Overseas Security Advisory Council, is a government office at the US Department of State within the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. I think Tristan will touch more on DS and what the role of the regional security officers or the agents are. But OSAC in itself is actually a public-private partnership. So while we do work with the regional security officers or the RSOs at the embassies and consulates around the world, we work primarily with the US private sector. And when we say private sector, it's businesses, organizations, nonprofits, universities, any entity that isn't a government institution. And the reason we partner with all of these different organizations is because our main mission or goal is to facilitate the exchange of security information. So the RSOs, which Tristan will touch on, how they are responsible for the safety and security of US government personnel, property, et cetera. We kind of tap into their expertise and share unclassified security information with security analysts, risk management experts at all these different organizations to ensure that they can operate abroad safely, whether it be in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Latin America. It's really quite a global mission. And in my role specifically, I do program management, which is a very broad term. And I think when we get to discussing how to conduct job searches and search for future opportunities, you'll find there are a lot of terms that are kind of vague and broad, like program management. So just to kind of be more specific, I am what I call my team, I call the people. So we are responsible for ensuring that these programs are successful. We facilitate meetings, events, webinars. We work with the RSOs to bring people together. So really just ensuring that all of the networks and communication platforms continue so that folks can share security information with one another. I get to travel to South Africa, sub-Saharan Africa when there isn't a pandemic. And I also work with colleagues who are more security analysts. So I ensure the programs are successful, but I work with individuals who are in more typical analyst or intelligence role, if you will, and are the SMEs, and I make sure they are presenting the information when needed. So that's the quick rundown on OSAC, and I can happy to get more in the weeds and answer questions. But in terms of my own path and how I got to where I am, as I only graduated from undergrad a few years ago, I attended Syracuse University and was an international relations major with a focus on global security. In terms of regional focus, I was a little all over the place. I took Spanish as my language. I studied abroad in Spain and also Israel. But then I had a Middle East focus. And now I'm in a position where I cover Africa and had no prior Africa experience. But after Syracuse, or while I was still an undergrad, I had a couple of internships, mostly at nonprofits, but focused on a variety of topics, including counterterrorism, the international higher education programs, et cetera. And when I graduated, I worked at a nonprofit in DC called Business Executives for National Security that also focused on public-private partnerships for security initiatives, similar to how OSAC does them on an international level. I work for a nonprofit that focused on national security here in the US. And then while I was there, I applied for a job at Diplomatic Security, actually in an admin assistant role in the policy and planning office at DS. So I knew I wanted to get into state. It's competitive. We'll talk about the different career paths, but I didn't have a security clearance. And so I saw it as an opportunity to get my foot in the door and work in more of an admin role to get my clearance. And while I was in that role in the policy and planning office, I heard about OSAC. So I didn't even know about OSAC until I was already a year or two into my career path. And it was something I was interested in. I enjoyed doing the public-private partnership work at the nonprofit. So I reached out, kind of tapped into my network and colleagues at DS and interviewed and got a job. and got my current job. And now I've been there for 2 years and constantly, thinking about future opportunities, whether I stay at State Department, go to the private sector as a security analyst, or also explore grad school and higher education. So I can ramble on and talk a lot, but so I'll just stop there and pass it back to Ron to give Tristan an opportunity to speak as well.
Thanks, Lily. And, I want to tell you, University of Wisconsin-Madison is an OSAC constituent, and we're very active, I think, with OSAC, at least as active as we can be. And they provide really, and Tristan will probably speak to this as well, both of us have worked in federal government for long periods of time, and they provide us with great information. It's open source intelligence, but it really gives us an extremely accurate and timely picture of what's going on in the world and what we can expect, moreover. So it's not just, it's not just a single direction flow either. They're able to tap into the expertise and the information, from all of their constituents, which include whether it's United Airlines or Lufthansa or Disney Corporation, Chrysler, whatever it might be, all of these organizations, these corporate structures that have extensive security offices as well, that are trying to continue business operations uninterrupted, and of course take care of their people overseas. And probably about 200 universities and colleges, I think, Lily, as well, maybe more than that.
Yeah, quite a lot. Or I think around 250 right now.
Is that true? So, all of us are acting as their eyes and ears as well. It's a two-way, sharing of information. And so I really feel that I was surprised, having come from federal government, that OSAC is just such a wonderful resource to us. I never expected that until I started to work with them as a constituent at UW-Madison. So really a vibrant resource for us, Lily.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ron. And I'll definitely say, just echo what you said, that RSOs and other embassy personnel on the ground, they have some eyes and ears, but when our office was created, it was because I think the federal government realized that all these companies were operating abroad and also had intelligence and unclassified information of the security threats they were seeing. And we realized there needed to be a two-way communication stream so that everyone was, on the same page and understanding what was going on. Even, individuals and companies that are what you would think of as competitors, so oil companies operating in the same area, they all at the end of the day want to stay safe, especially from terrorist threats, etc. So they find it's very interesting how barriers are broken down quickly when people want to share security information.
And that's a big part of what Lily does when she says the sharing and creating information and communications platforms, is she puts the different sectors with one another, whether they're in regional working groups or whether they're in specific thematic sectors like the Academic Steering Committee or others. There's a Middle East working group. Each region has a working group. I'm on several of those and participate. We get so much information, in real time via listservs that just start trading information as soon as there's a question about the ability to continue operations safely, whether it's on behalf of students or researchers, or again, corporate officers or engineers working abroad in ensuring their business access as well. So a big mission and an important one as well on behalf of the American people. Tristan, we'll come to you now. I saw you were having a little bit of the technical problems there. You got booted off and you're back with us. So you can hear us okay? Is that true?
Yeah. Yep. Sorry about that, Ron.
No, not at all. So so what I asked, I don't know if you were with me when I asked Lily the opening question there, but I would like you to describe the role and mission of the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. It's not, an agency that immediately comes to mind, even when we think of the Department of State, but it's so important. As I've told you many times, I crossed paths with the RSOs when we were traveling on active duty, and I didn't know they existed until they were introduced to me, and then I realized really what an important role they play, not just in the embassy structure, but on behalf of U.S. citizens that are transiting and operating in particular foreign locations, for a variety of reasons and lengths of time. So if you could tell us about the Bureau of Diplomatic Security and your own role, their roles, the agents' roles at an embassy, and in the consulate system, and then also about your specific path to DS and how you arrived there, how you first came to know about them, how you competed for selection and a little bit about that too.
Yeah, happy to do so. And I apologize because I did get booted pretty early, I think, in the presentation. So I might be repeating some of the stuff that Lily stated, but I'll try and keep it as separate as I can. So just for a little bit of background, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security is the safety and security arm of the U.S. State Department. Within the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, there is the Diplomatic Security Service, which is where all the special agents sort of reside. And for reference, there's only about 2,500 special agents, at least last I knew, which makes it a relatively small arm of the federal law enforcement. And to your point, not a lot of people know about it. The primary functions of a special agent are sort of threefold, and there are some other areas, but I'll keep it at a high level. First, it's to investigate passport and visa fraud, domestically primarily. So most DS agents have a first domestic assignment before they go overseas as part of the Foreign Service. And the distinction between the Foreign Service, you probably heard before Foreign Service officers. DS agents are actually considered Foreign Service specialists. So officers are the primarily coned officers, so economic, political, consular, et cetera, where specialists really reside in a specific area that they are tasked with their entire careers. FSOs can sort of jump between cones and they can do different assignments. Special agents will always be special agents. They won't jump over to economic, they won't jump over to consular. So just want to put that out there for anybody that's confused about the difference. In addition to Foreign Service specialists, special agents, there are other specific examples within the State Department as well, including like medical officers, management cone, what is it, the business officers, and et cetera, but just to disambiguate. So special agents do three things primarily. Domestically, they investigate passport and visa fraud. They also provide protective liaison support, protective security to all below sitting heads of state. So everybody's familiar with the Secret Service and how they protect the president and all foreign heads of state that come to the US. The State Department has everybody else. So all the foreign ministers, the Dalai Lama, the royals, everybody else besides sitting heads of state, the State Department does protective security for. With as I stated before, only about 2,500 agents. It's actually a pretty large tasking. So there's a lot of assignments on TDY where you'll be tasked out to support certain protective detail, or you'll be tasked out with going overseas to do protective security of the US Secretary of State while he or she goes on diplomacy efforts across the world. And then finally, Ron, to your point about the work of regional security officers. So when special agents go overseas, they're still special agents, but they also encumber a dual role where they become assistant regional security officers or regional security officers if you're the senior person for the team there. And they're primarily charged with protecting the chief of mission personnel, the property, and the information inside the embassies and consulates overseas. To that end, the typical work of a DS agent overseas can really run the gamut. So I was in Afghanistan for a year, I was in Jerusalem for a year, but I also did TDY assignments to places like Yemen for 4 months or so. But I also did TDYs to places like Paris and Switzerland. So it really runs the gamut in terms of what you'll do and what you'll see. The one thing that's good about it, from my perspective, is there was so much variety. And if you didn't like what you were doing one day or who you were working with, don't worry, because 2 weeks down the line, they're out on the next assignment, or you're out on your next assignment. To that end, every 1 to 2 years, 3 years max, you are moving to a new assignment. So I was in Los Angeles for my first assignment for 2 years, and I was in Afghanistan for a year, and then I was in Jerusalem. But there's lots of TDYs and trainings that also come before that. And on the training part, when you become a special agent, you first do a indoctrination of 7 months of training, basic special agent training, where you'll do primarily, here's the nuts and bolts of conducting passport visa frauds. You'll do a lot of driving, a lot of shooting, a lot of other things that are encumbered to the position. And then before you go overseas, you'll also do another 4 or 5 months of additional training to get ready to do basically static security and working with what you'll be doing as a regional security officer overseas. So there's a lot of training that's involved in the job. From a personal background, how I came to be in DS. So I was actually a political science major at Kansas State University. I went to law school after undergrad. One, because I realized there wasn't a whole lot you can do with just political science degree. And second, because I was interested in becoming an FBI agent. And that was traditionally one of the 5 ways in: accounting, language, diversified, law. And so I knew that it was sort of a long shot. And if I didn't get it, I would be just as happy practicing law. I had done debate in high school and in college, and it's sort of a 2-path sort of situation. One day while I was looking at our alumni database, however, I realized that there was somebody that was called a special agent with the State Department. I scratched my head and said, what the heck is that? On a whim, I reached out to that person and learned more about it. And I said, wow, that really sounds exactly like what I want. So I ended up applying to an internship with DS 2 times when I was in law school, and I got no responses both times. And then I applied for the job, and knock on wood, for some reason, I got through the entire process and got a conditional offer. So I just want to say that it's very hit or miss. So especially for undergrads, you may be getting a lot of rejections with some of the jobs you're applying for. Don't let that discourage you. There's so many different things that you can do, and so many different opportunities that will open up. And just because you've been denied one elsewhere doesn't mean that you won't eventually come to what your dream job is. So I just want to put that out there. Oh, and then, sorry, I'm sort of rambling here, but another part of the background part. So I did a study abroad. I heard Lily mention that. I did a study abroad when I was in law school in Egypt. And I was an international studies dual major along with my time at Kansas State. And I was a Spanish minor. So I think all those things sort of helped my application. But I will say that it is really competitive to be a special agent. When I was in, it was like less than a 1% acceptance rate of all those that applied. But there's a lot of applications and a small amount of ultimate spots that can be filled, particularly if your total mission is only 2,500 people. So out of my basic special agent class of 24, 21 of those people came from a law enforcement or military background. But I think that's a lot to do with the applicant pool. I mean, it generally seems that most of the people that knew about it were people that had that sort of background. Of those that didn't have that background, one was straight from undergrad. One had prior experience as a contractor with the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, which seems to be a good pathway in if you're interested in that. And then finally, there was myself, and I came straight from grad school to DS. So there's a diversity of sort of experience, but that's my path to it.
Thanks, Tristan. I've got a couple of follow-on questions here for you. I've written down. How large? I've been to in Bogota and Jerusalem are the places where I've really interacted with the RSOs quite a bit, a little bit in Riyadh as well, but not a lot of time with them specifically, just poke my head in the office. But at a typical embassy, how large is the office? Is it always, and I don't mean square footage, right? I'm not trying to scope out who gets to live where, but who, how many agents are assigned there? There's a chief of station, I suppose. And then I remember 4 or 5, at least seeing 4 or 5 in both offices that I visited. Is that typical? And are they also at every consulate, or only if consulates are in a larger, several larger urban areas? How does that work? What's the typical profile?
Sure, yeah. It really depends upon the size of the chief of mission. So how big the mission is in the first place. And then it also determines upon the security environmental threat list rating for political violence and terrorism. So that determines sort of the size of the RSO shop. In some places, like in Jerusalem, it was 5 people. But in Afghanistan or Iraq, you could be looking upwards of 30. In other places like Reykjavik or Latvia, it may be only 1 or 2 people. So it really does run the gamut. I think with respect to how big the office is, it really depends upon the threats and the size of the mission that determines that.
Okay, and I do also, I wrote down, just for anybody that didn't pick up on it, just in context, TDY, we used the word TDY quite a bit, Lily did as well, is temporary duty. So it's just like if anybody, at UW-Madison was sent off to go to a week-long conference someplace, that's a TDY, a short one. And they can be extremely long. Usually it's less than 180 days, but they can extend those as well in the federal system. So that's just sort of the federal acronym for temporary duty away from your current assigned location. Also, Tristan, I wanted to ask you, where do the RSOs typically live? Is it always within the embassy compound at the diplomatic apartments? Yeah. Or can you live on the economy there with your family? What's the typical conditions like? What do you do? It just depends on the location?
Again, it depends on the location. So in places like Afghanistan, you're on a compound. So everybody lives within the walls, and you're in a Connex box, for all intents and purposes. In other places, you live on the local economy, but it's housing that's supplied by the embassy. So there's a pool of basically apartments that have been vetted and approved by the regional security office and have had security upgrades depending upon the location. In other places, you are out on the economy, and the U.S. government can give you money depending on where you're at. But for the most part, it's that second one that I gave you, where the embassy or consulate has a pool of available apartments or houses, and then they assign people as they come in and rotate out. So if somebody leaves, the next family will come in and encumber that.
And that's with your family, right? So the children would go to the embassy schools or the DOD schools, the DOD school, whatever is available locally.
That's right. So it depends on if the post is accompanied or not. So that depends on whether it's a high threat post or not. So obviously in Afghanistan, you're not taking your family with you. In other places like Jerusalem, you can. And when you're there, not only does you're getting housing on the U.S. government dime, but you're also getting American schools for your children at government expense as well. So that's definitely a benefit.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Lily, let's come back to you. I've got some questions. And this is something, at times while I've been here, some of the OSAC analysts and staff members, officers have left OSAC and gone to jobs with United Airlines, in the Global Security Operations Center there, and done a few other things. But what's a typical career path? So you're in your first assignment, but even your role's changed a little bit since you and I met originally and expanded. Now you're working the Africa desk as well. What's a typical path once you're hired at OSAC? Obviously, which role you're hired into originally will change some of that. But what's a typical sort of path? And also, where have you seen the analysts go? What sorts of broad profile jobs have you seen them enter using OSAC as sort of a foundation for that expertise?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Ron. And I'm actually a third-party contractor, which I think Tristan at one point mentioned. We call them TPCs. And so there's basically different hiring types or paths in the federal government. And so I'm not foreign service, I'm not civil service. It's kind of like in the middle. And so a lot of those of us on the staff level are these contractors. So we're just in terms of hiring process, we're employed by an external company, but we work for State Department. If the contract company loses the bid, we don't leave, we just get put on a new contract. So it's really just a way to pay us because federal benefits are quite extensive. And there's actually quite a lot of contractors in federal government. I didn't always know that as an undergrad, but there's tons and tons of contractors at State Department, and I encourage you to explore it, explore the opportunities. But to get back to your main question, yeah, so some of us are analysts, some of us are program managers at the staff level, and afterwards, we might not necessarily rise up within OSAC to a federal position, but OSAC is kind of the best of both worlds in terms of exploring future career opportunities because you're in a government environment, but you're not yet committed to the foreign or civil service career paths. But you're working with individuals that are in those jobs, so you get to learn about them. And then you're also working with the private sector. So if you change your mind, decide, oh, I don't want to continue to work in government, or I don't want to pursue, the agent career path, you're constantly working with individuals in private industry, at nonprofits, at universities. So it's kind of like you're constantly networking just on a daily basis. So in terms of where I've seen former colleagues go, I have seen former colleagues become DS agents. They've taken the exam and gone through the process like Tristan had, or they took the Foreign Service Officer exam and became a Foreign Service Officer abroad. But I've also seen individuals go into corporate security and work for an airline or a hotel, or even go on to be a security analyst at Amazon or Coca-Cola. There's so many companies that operate on an international scale. So I've also seen some individuals pursue higher education and pivot their career paths, or work for international organizations like the UN or the World Bank, and transfer the skills they've built either as an analyst or, they already have a clearance, so they are familiar with facilitating that security information. And there's all these different terms that I think in undergrad I didn't know, but you'll become familiar with as you do your job search. So don't be overwhelmed at first. I encourage you to constantly explore different positions, whether it's while talking to career professionals or looking on job search engines, including the US government's own usajobs.gov, because there are going to be terms that you need to become familiar with, like program management, analyst, risk management, emergency response, security consulting, all these broad terms that you'll start to become familiar with. Ron, you're on mute.
You can tell Lily, look, see how quickly she shouted me down there? She's used to doing these virtual programs at this point.
Yeah, I'm just always on top of my speakers. So
the mic didn't pick up bozo though. Normally it's you're on mute bozo, right? You moron. Hey, so what with the contracting jobs? So obviously USA Jobs would carry the GS and civil service jobs as they open up, whether it's a single individual hires or whether it's collectively where it's a hiring pool. But how would they find out? How would students that are interested in working at, let's say, OSAC specifically, or similar agencies, how would they find out about the contract jobs? Because those contracts tend to change. I mean, I don't know if you're comfortable saying the names of some of the companies. Obviously, there's one that seems to be sort of an alternative to the U.S. government, but Booz Allen, obviously everybody knows, who Booz Allen is, so I don't mind. I'm not advertising for them, but that's the name that comes to mind often, associated with U.S. government contracting positions for personnel. How do they go about that? Is there a single, collective threshold for entering those job searches, or is there another avenue?
Yeah, that's always the $1 million question that people ask me. And first, I will distinguish between, I think, two different types of contracting work. So there are the big companies, like you said, Booz Allen, et cetera, that have contracting positions. So in that case, you often go to work for that larger consulting company like Booz Allen, and then you're an employee of Booz Allen, but they have government contract projects. So they will contract out and you will stay an employee of Booz Allen, but you will work for, say, a project for DoD, and then you'll work on a project for the CDC or for State Department. But there's an entirely different type of third-party contracting that I wasn't aware of as an undergrad, but it's the type of contracting I'm in, where you are hired and you work in the government, but you don't have the federal benefits. You're hired through that third-party company. So the State Department takes care of all that contract work. It's all above my head how they sort it out and do the budget and all of the logistics, but they use it just as a hiring avenue, basically. So I do work for the State Department, but I'm employed by, I'm happy to share my company name. It's currently McManus and Monsalve. They were actually just acquired by another group called SSI. And so these companies change out constantly because they have to bid on contracts with the government. And I know I'm using a lot of unfamiliar terms probably, but if my company loses the bid, I am lucky in that I stay an employee of State Department. They'll just put me under another contract company. So it's, people say there's pros and cons to both. As a contractor, I have a little more flexibility in searching for new jobs, but at the same time, I don't receive the federal benefits like, say, Tristan does as an agent. So I don't have, free housing and education for my kids if I went abroad, but I can explore other opportunities. And for example, I've been at State for 4 years and I've had 2 different positions, but I've worked for 5 different contract companies, and almost none of them were by choice. It's just that the contract lost the bid and my bosses made sure that our office got a new one. And so yeah, it's pretty in the weeds, but that's kind of how it works. So knowing that, the best way to kind of find these smaller contract companies, because they often are very small, they'll have only 20 to 50 people. There are larger ones that have hundreds of employees, but the thing I tell people is, in addition to just looking on your generic job search engines, is to first find an office or a bureau or an agency that you want to work for and just network. And networking can be really intimidating, but one of the things you can do is just talk to alumni from your alma mater, or if you have internships, really just tap into the networks there and ask people, hey, do you know anyone in this office at State Department? I think I'd be really interested in working there in the future. And just ask people like, hey, do you have any third party contractor opportunities? Because it really is sometimes hard to find the companies. And like Ron said, they change constantly. And there's no magic, unfortunately, search engine that has just a list of these are the 50 companies that currently have contracts with the State Department, because it also becomes illegal and hiring concern, I think. But again, that's over my head. And just back to, yeah, advice on how to search, just ask people as you network through internships and other opportunities, and you'll start to see names pop up of different companies.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's good information, Lily. And all the services and Department of Defense and state, every agency and federal, two-button department, two-letter department has so many contractors associated with them. And I really had no idea, we would hire people. Sometimes I was the hiring, was doing the hire, and I still had the system was baffling to me. There's particular people that handle that. And so I think what Lily's saying for the audience, especially the students who may be either headed to graduate school or wanting to enter the job market directly, is, as she says, you've got to get to know people, even if it can be a little awkward. Networking can be intimidating, especially if you're not the sort of person that's extremely extroverted and wants to push themselves in front of folks, or aren't accustomed to that. But what you have to remember is that a big part of someone like Lily, someone like Tristan's, roles while they were in those positions is to help younger people, seek and compete for those jobs. And Tristan, described a very competitive job market, but at the same time, he had a class of 24. That's 24 people who otherwise might have said, ooh, those odds aren't very good, I won't apply. But yet they ended up in Tristan's class and with him and graduated to continue into the diplomatic security arm, and we're special agents. So somebody has to get those jobs, and sometimes the numbers can seem daunting, but it's really not. It falls in your lap, even if it's the 24th try or more than that. So it seems like the job matches the person oftentimes. Tristan, can you tell us a little bit more about contracting? The way you mentioned that some are actually associated with diplomatic security as contractors, not just in OSAC and the analysis realm, but also on the providing personnel security and regional security. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, happy to. And actually, just to echo what Lily was speaking about, the contracting world. So like I mentioned before, I got my conditional offer with the State Department while I was still in law school. But once I graduated, the offer didn't line up. So I was still waiting for that final offer of employment, the completion of my security clearance to come through, and for a class date to open. During that time that I was looking, waiting for my class date to open, I actually got a job as a contractor as well at Fort Leavenworth as a human terrain analyst. And again, it was one of those small companies with about 20 people that was assigned to a very specific contract with the Department of Defense. And I only found out about it via word of mouth. One of my buddies who graduated with a Master's of Science at K-State in Security Studies had gotten a job. He told me about it, and they were on a hiring frenzy to get the position staffed up because they had just won the contract. And so it just worked out. So I was only in that role for about 4 months before my final offer with the State Department came through, and I got the ultimate job. But I can say that a lot of those people that were contractors for that brief period that I was there went on to get jobs with the federal government or other contracts, including with BAE and others. So it really is a gateway. And once you get your security clearance, I think it helps also to open a lot of doors. With respect to the contractors overseas, the State Department, particularly in high threat locations, works with third-party contractors for security support. So in Afghanistan or Iraq or even Israel, we'll have a third-party company, and they may change their name again every couple of years because they're escaping legal woes or they're working on something else. But it's companies that you've heard of before, like Blackwater or Triple Canopy or Constellus, that are sort of always evolving, that are the boots on the ground for motorcade movements. And then as a special agent, we would be the special agent in charge, or the AIC agent in charge of like these motorcade movements if they move in and out of the West Bank, or if the ambassador, is going on a visit to, Herat, Afghanistan, we would be with them as we make that movement together. The State Department also has contracts with a lot of times third country nationals in some locations to do guard support. So they are the people that are standing outside of the embassy or consulate. And sometimes in certain countries, you can't have locally employed staff members for security reasons, so you'll get third country nationals flown in. So we actually, when I was in Afghanistan, I think that they were mostly Nepalese during my time there. But in other locations, it's weird how the contracts work, but it'll be a specific country that seems to fill all the roles for that contract. A little bit about that as well. So the RSOs overseas do protective security support for the embassies and consulates. That means working with local security guards, surveillance detection, and et cetera, to make sure that mission is accomplished. So it is sort of a program in and of itself.
Tristan, and can you tell us a little bit more about a typical RSO role? I don't think we've really gotten into what I believe is, makes up the most of each of your days. Obviously, like you say, it's so varied, but you've been in some places that tended to have a little bit more, a little higher risk of, obviously, Yemen and Afghanistan, but but I know you spent time in Jordan, and other agents would spend time, whether it's in Europe or East Asia, Africa, places that are a little bit more of just the sort of constant interaction with, local host law enforcement agencies, whether the community itself, with the host foreign ministry or internal ministry, and just working through, health organizations, et cetera. We're really creating a profile that ensures that the U.S. Embassy is looking out for not only their own staff, but for our citizens and our allied and coalition citizens that are working in the country, whether it be in business or whether it be for personal travel or whatever the outreach might be. So just a little bit more about the typical, daily job that may not be, quite, when we talk about Afghanistan or Iraq, for the last 20 years, things have been, in chaos in both locations that are a little bit more atypical than what we might expect in diplomatic security.
Yeah. So apart from the high threat posts, which is the majority of postings that special agents will go to, even if the high threat posts have bigger offices just because of they need the bodies. Most of the security RSO sort of program is dependent upon the size of the office and the number of programs that are involved. So in Jerusalem, you may have the residential security portfolio. So you're working with our government services office to do the contracts and do the site security surveys of new housing that the chief of mission will bring under its purview and assign to chief of mission personnel. You may have also, as I said before, working with our local guard force. So you may be in charge of 250 local guards and working with their people to make sure the schedules are aligned, that everybody's in tip-top shape and doing their job. So you're basically the manager of the overall program. It could involve things like surveillance detection. So in some locations, there might be teams that are basically watching for people watching the embassy or consulate. So almost like a counter surveillance, as it were, to make sure that if there are any threats, that it is being picked up on and acted upon in as expeditious fashion as possible. You may have the soft target program, soft target liaison program, that's working with U.S. interests overseas that are traditionally, again, don't have as robust targets, but could be targets of opportunity. So in Jerusalem, I was assigned to our American schools. So working with the administrators there to ensure that the safety of the children of chief of mission personnel and any other Americans that are there are supported by the U.S. government. And so it's doing things like security upgrades on cameras and doors and making sure that in events of crisis that the communication is able to flow freely and that the embassy can provide support as needed. It just really runs the gamut with respect to location and the type of work that's involved. But to your point, it does involve an awful lot of work with host country law enforcement and military. So to that point, we would work with the Israeli Defense Forces to manage events that we would have at the embassy or consulate or at the ambassador's residence, 4th of July event. So we're working closely to develop plans in coordination with the local host nation security apparatus to ensure the safe conduct of that event. Or if we're going on movements, to the West Bank. Let's see, when I was there, I guess now President Biden came on a visit and went to the Muqata in Ramallah, which is the equivalent of the White House for the Palestinian Authority. And so, we would work with not only Israeli Defense Forces, but also the Palestinian security apparatus to make sure that the checkpoints and movements went smoothly and that the safe conduct of diplomacy could happen, or almost like it's a precondition to effective diplomacy is providing that security support during that time. And that's actually where one of my favorite, experiences is working with local contacts, learning, in Yemen, you'd be on a security mission, and while the ambassador's inside, you and 5 other people that don't speak a word of English, and your Arabic is terrible, are squatting below a huge thing of food and eating with your hands, and trying to make connections. So it was really neat, in retrospect, some of those opportunities that you get to experience and the different cultures and the relationships that you can build.
Yeah, in my impression of what the RSO do is it's so much more direct than what we did, especially in my department overseas, where we were taking care of our own mission, our own jobs, whereas what you're doing is getting out and really working with host nation in great degree. And you're writing the advisories and the travel warnings and alerts that go out as well once those are approved by the chief of station. Is that correct? Is that the way that kind of thing goes too?
Yeah, the RSO shop works closely with OSAC for the health safety reports and for any updates that would come through. Obviously, consular is heavily involved in that as well, because there's a no double standard policy, so we can't give advice to chief of mission personnel that is not publicly available to the American public at large. So it is a lot of coordination with headquarters with OSAC for those sort of things, and for the advisories and reports that go out. Ron, one other thing I was going to mention is with respect to domestic assignments. When you're assigned domestically, I mentioned that you not only do investigations, but protective security detail for anything below heads of state. But that also entails working with embassies and consulates of foreign missions that reside within here. So in Los Angeles, there's 50 plus consulates that were located there. So a lot of times, if there was a protest at the Chinese embassy, our protective liaison function would be out there with the LAPD and with the representatives of the chief of mission for the Chinese government. And so you're developing relationships both domestically and abroad, which I thought was really neat as well. And then similarly, if the foreign minister or the vice president, were to come in, we would be assigned the protective security detail, and we'd work with our counterparts. So the Chinese law enforcement that's conducting security for Xi Jinping, or whoever the protectee is at that time, which is again really interesting, and a lot of opportunities for cross-cultural communication and meeting new people that you wouldn't get almost anywhere else.
Yeah, fascinating. A wide profile.
Definitely.
Lily, real quickly. So I want to and then we're going to go shoot to the questions. There's some great questions here in the chat, but within OSAC, within your office, so I've seen you move a little bit there, in your role. What's a next logical step for you? You've been there, about 3 years now, coming up on something like that. What's the next logical step for you if you wanted to remain in OSAC?
So within OSAC, actually above me, there are civil service federal hires. So technically I couldn't become a supervisor, but there are, within my contract, there are salary increases built in. So technically I would move from being a regular analyst or regular program manager to a senior analyst or senior program manager, where
there's steps.
Right. So there's steps. So it's not totally a rising up the ladder kind of thing, but at least my salary would increase and I would have a wider portfolio, some more responsibilities, and probably get priority for other travel opportunities and things like that for my own professional development and growth. But otherwise, I would have to, it's always a challenge to navigate kind of the civil service and federal service and contractor world and decide, oh, could I move into another office to get a federal position and then one day come back to OSAC as a supervisor, or, become a DS agent kind of thing.
Right. Well, thank you. Good. I appreciate your answer there. We'll go straight to question and answers now. We've gone a little bit, our timing's actually okay. We're fine. Lily, this first question is for you. You mentioned your background in counterterrorism and international relations. You also mentioned a school that I've never heard of. I think they played a little basketball there at Syracuse, but not very well. Do you also contribute to the OSAC analyses and reports that come out in your position? I've seen some things come from you. Can you tell us just a little bit about that briefly? That's a great question.
Sure. So the OSAC analysis reports are done by the analyst team. So I'm more on the events program management side of the house. So I am not the individual writing those security reports, but I work closely with the analyst, my regional counterpart, who also covers Africa, and I ensure that those reports are distributed to the appropriate audiences. Anyone can email me, whether it's Ron from a more academic kind of institution,
I don't bother you that much.
or whether it's individuals operating with, trying to think of random company, Coca-Cola again in South Africa, saying, hey, do you have any information? I say, yes, let me connect you to the analyst. So I'm kind of that central hub to make sure people are getting the right information, because we don't just work with the RSOs in the private sector, but also other interagency folks. So for example, I've managed our academia group, but also our aviation group. So I've connected with TSA and the FAA and the Canadians who are doing this new initiative called Safer Skies. And we make sure that everyone's communicating with one another.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see, this one comes from John. Any recommendations for entering the security consulting industry in the private sector for a recent graduate? So a lot of companies now doing a large variety of things in where they're predicating and structuring security, whether it's in the cyber realm, the information security realm, or messaging, et cetera, creating a strong message and ensuring that that's not manipulated or usurped externally. So what are some of the firms that are interested that you've seen hire entry level staff from either one of you that might want to discuss that? Lily, you may have seen more recent, trends in this area. I don't know. Tristan, if you have something to add, throw in there as well.
I'll go with, yeah, there's some larger ones like Booz Allen, Raytheon, and then there's other groups that are larger like Deloitte, KPMG, et cetera, which you think of more as, accounting and tax firms. But if you search for what positions they might have available in DC, they may work on federal projects. But I've seen, more often they work in, information management, cybersecurity, defense industry and supply, those type of things. So there are entry level positions, I think, in with those companies.
Security consulting.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, UW-Madison graduates have been placed with some great companies. I have a graduate now, and the students that I've had I always say this, so you'll have heard this too many times probably, who's working for Amazon right now in their Global Security Operations Center, which really is vibrant and very active, and as you would expect, extremely well resourced. So we can all get our packages delivered straight to our doorstep just about when we put down our phone after we order, right? A little bit frightening. Tristan, did you have anything to add to that particular question? An answer about the contracts? Oh, his camera may have froze. Yep, Tristan, you're frozen. We'll see. He may have to log back in. I'll try to email him here. Let's see if there's another one for you, Lily. Well, this is a good one, and I'll text Tristan. How important do job opportunities, as far as your application and the competitive selection, really, have you found a graduate degree to be? I believe you were hired without a graduate degree, right? Straight from your undergraduate experience. Mm-hmm. So how important is that? Were you just lucky, or?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. In at OSAC in particular, there seems to be a mix on the staff. There are several of us who were hired without a graduate degree. Some people are currently in grad school part-time, and then others did come in with a graduate degree. And there's never a direct, or rather right or wrong answer, I think, when people ask me this. I think it really depends on the individual, especially if you're an undergrad and considering whether to go to graduate school right away or to work for a few years. In my case, I definitely wanted to work for a few years to get the professional experience to make myself more competitive for grad school, and also to kind of solidify that my career interests were what I actually wanted to do. I basically wanted to test out a few positions. So I think I will say in international relations and security or intelligence in general, I think like a lot of industries, having a master's is becoming far more common than it was 10, 20,
Yeah.
even 20 years ago.
Really is.
Yeah, I think some career paths, such as foreign service, um, it really runs the gambit. Some individuals come in without a graduate degree very young and continue in the foreign service for 20, 30 years and never get a graduate degree. And then you have individuals who spend their career in academia, get their PhD, and then join the foreign service mid-career. So it really depends, but overall, I think it's becoming more common for professionals in IR and security to pursue graduate studies somewhere like 4 years after entering the workforce, or say 10 years, so more like mid-career. I myself am exploring grad school because I know it's something I want to do at some point, and I think it will benefit me long term. But I think unlike business or other industries where it's required to have a salary increase, I like to think of it more as an IR. It's not just for a salary increase, but to get to where I want to go. So there are jobs I could get without a master's, but if I'm being ambitious and really want this specific opportunity, I know I have to have a master's.
That's
So
going to be a threshold for you, you think?
yeah, I personally see it as threshold, but like I said, it really depends on the individual and the different career paths you want. It
Okay.
can go either way.
Thank you. That's great information for the students. And I know there's some graduate students here with us too right now. Tristan, it looks like you've called in.
Yeah, sorry about that, Ron. I'm having computer problems.
Oh, that's all right. You're good. So did you work, this is a question specific to you. This is an interesting question. Did you work specifically with Shin Bet or the Mossad during your time in Jerusalem? I kind of know the answer to this. And how was the interaction, with the host intelligence agencies like this? Are you well received as a diplomatic security officer? And are they forthcoming with you, or is it a little bit of a tense relationship?
Yeah. So to the question, yes. And a lot of it is, personality dependent. So you have good relationships in some areas and less so in others. So it's really depends upon the location. We had a pretty good relationship in Israel, thankfully.
Good. No, that's interesting. And of course, with both, like you said, both local law enforcement agencies, in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Haifa, and then state agencies as well, I would assume too, right? Across the gamut.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely right.
Good. Let's see what else we have here. You've mentioned the way, this comes from Lena, you mentioned that how information is shared between organizations about threats and risks. I think, Lily, this is back to you, really, in your role at OSAC. What are some of the examples of the sorts of threats that you're addressing? And obviously, we see those threats that you see and are collating overseas and are responding to and creating information resources. Those are what translate to risks for students and graduate researchers and our faculty members here at UW-Madison traveling abroad. So that's a great question. Lily, what are the sorts of things that you see? Maybe some of those that have not been what immediately come to mind as well.
Yeah, and I was just trying to list them in my head to think of any that anyone wouldn't be familiar with. So threats, it's really a broad term. So I think traditionally in the last 10 to 20 years, there was a large focus on physical security, and there still is, and it's still really important, especially for regional security officers. But there's also things like cybersecurity threats, especially in areas where there's counterintelligence issues. And really the threats change everywhere, depending on the region, the country, the city. And that's why it's so important for the analysts on my team to write the different reports. Because someone like Ron might be sending some students to Nairobi and ask, what do we need to be worried about here? Is it petty crime, which you'd be surprised is often overlooked, but one of the biggest issues. So individuals getting mugged, you shouldn't be out at this time at night kind of thing, which seems like common sense, but it can be a big issue in some places. So, we might just have that recommendation. Even in Africa, people think, oh, there's terrorism. There is, but as an individual going on a 2-week or 6-month assignment, you're actually more likely to be affected by road safety. So threats can really, like I said, change based on where you're going and what you need to be aware of. But yeah, cybersecurity, physical security, petty crime. Even right now, we're in a pandemic, so actually health security it already kind of was becoming a bigger part of the conversation, and then the pandemic happened. So right now, a lot of us in the security industry and even within the State Department, our day-to-day jobs have changed from tracking where are there protests. Protests is another big one, because you'd be surprised how often protests turn violent. We've seen it happen in the US this year, but previously it's been a major concern abroad. So it used to be, oh, we're tracking these protests, we're tracking cybersecurity attacks on students' devices in China, we're tracking the housing security, are they safe, are there break-ins at night? But now our day-to-day jobs have solely been consumed by the pandemic and vaccine rollout, and where cases are going up and down. And that's, I think, primarily what security analysts are tracking. They've gone from tracking 12 different issues to one.
Yeah, of course. Which in the transition, though, from the pandemic, as we're talking about now on campus and among ourselves, folks like Tristan and I now in his current role, we're talking about those indirect effects that are going to basically grow from the direct effect of disease, whether it's socioeconomic or continued civil unrest or resurgent civil unrest, based on fragile governance that, in the beginning, before last December, as this began to unfold. So there's just so much that's going to flow from this. I tell you, for both Tristan and Lily, and Tristan, you'll remember this, that during about the first 3 months, about the first 90 days of the pandemic, I would say late January up through March, maybe even into April, our very best source of information was coming from the RSO. I believe he was in Shanghai, and he was sending out extremely detailed profile reports every day. And those were, again, sometimes 2 pages long with very detailed information and updating information. So he provided our eyes and ears to not only several hundred colleges and universities, but to several hundred and well over 1,000 corporate businesses with a presence in China and operating in China, and NGOs and religious-based organizations. He was really the eyes and ears for all of us who otherwise were not getting very strong information via the public media, whether it was in Europe or in China itself. So just a lot of information was stilted, and that RSO really filled that void for us via that relationship with OSAC. So extremely valuable, Lily. Let's see some of the other questions here. And this is to whomever wants to field it. How do you determine whether a position is entry level? So when you're looking at jobs and how they're labeled, how do you determine if that's entry level or if they're really looking for somebody more senior? If in the list of requirements, it doesn't say you need a depth of experience in security analysis working in the commercial sector or something like that. There's, especially in the civil service hiring realm, the requirements are often very specific with lots of alternative ways to meet those requirements. Or you can substitute 3 years of graduate education with an experience, et cetera. They're very specific. But is there some other sort of annotation or unspoken code there that the students might look for when they're looking at jobs that tell you, gee, are they qualified, or are they really looking for somebody who's got 5 to 7 years of experience in that realm?
Yeah, I'll try to take a stab at this one. It's definitely a really good question. It's hard to answer, but just to start off, sometimes it will say how many years of experience they're looking for. And I actually want to say, don't be deterred if it says that 4 to 5 years or 5 to 7 years. Sometimes that does indicate they're looking for someone more at the mid-career level. But I just graduated 4 or 5 years ago, and when I was first searching for a job right out of undergrad, I was constantly frustrated because a position would say entry level at the top and it would be advertised, but at the bottom it would say 5 to 7 years experience. And I was like, well, how do they expect me to have 5 to 7 years experience if it's an entry level position? So I would say, of course you can apply to everything, but don't automatically be deterred. In terms of other indicators, if it doesn't say entry level or it doesn't have years of experience listed, sometimes it will say if the role requires kind of management experience in terms of being a supervisor. So sometimes it will indicate you will be overseeing a team of 4 to 5 individuals, or this role requires prior supervisor experience. And that will indicate it's probably more of a mid-level career opportunity. And yeah, I think if Tristan, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Oh, you're muted, Tristan. There
Can you hear me now?
Yep, gotcha.
Sorry, I'm a mess today. So sorry. Yeah, no, I think you covered it, Lily. It's been a while since I've applied to many positions, but I just want to echo what Lily said about, not being discouraged by thinking you can't get it, right? Like I said, I got the DS gig on my first try, even after being denied internships previously. So you never know, where that hit or miss is going to come from. And with federal, as Ron stated, it's a lot more, detailed about either or. So it's a lot more segmented, but for corporate, for private sector, that's not the case. So don't be discouraged by anything that you may see, unless, to Lily's point, there are those things that say, managerial experience or X number of dollars managed in the past, and you clearly don't have it.
Tristan, there's another question here, so I'll just keep you on the line. When we talk about security studies, and especially our graduates that have come from, a truly intellectualized experience and curriculum like Lily did and you did in IR at K-State as well, and then through law school. And then you went into dealing primarily with personnel security. Is there a divide in what you did between the geopolitical, what I would call strategic analysis, and the personnel security, or the more tactical level, operations level analysis that went into creating a safe environment for travelers and for U.S. presence and for business continuity? Or is you have the ability as an RSO and in diplomatic security to also weave the two together and cross back and forth, across that otherwise seemingly divide, from the two undertakings, and use your expertise in a little bit, maybe in both manners, even simultaneously? Or are they different career paths entirely? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to your point, there aren't really advanced degrees in the practical nuts and bolts of security. There are a lot of certifications that you can do, that make you a lot more competitive for a lot of these positions, like CPP or some of these other ones that are out there, particularly for corporate security. But with respect to how it integrates at the State Department, it really comes with more exceedingly senior levels of position, right? So, I was a low-level special agent, but if you're in there for 20 years, you could become a senior foreign service officer. You could be, reach that rank. In some rare instances, you can become even an ambassador with DS. And there's not too many of them, so if that's your goal, I wouldn't encourage DS as the way to get there. But as you get more seniority, there are opportunities within the DS to become undersecretaries or more senior positions that deal with the more strategic or geopolitical landscape, as opposed to just the practical nuts and bolts part of what most regional security officers, deal with at a country level.
Right. And, for the audience, I've got to tell you, it's the same, I think, whenever you enter, what in a very broadly defined, we're talking about intelligence gathering and sharing in a very, open source manner for both undertakings for the most part, 90% of the roles probably. But when you enter into a job, regardless of the department or the agency or the service in federal government or state government as well, or a State Department of Justice or investigative agency, et cetera. There's a lot of those. Don't overlook those either. Remember, or with the corporate global security operations office, remember that originally you're going to be asked to do what you may believe are mundane, activities on a daily basis, but those are very important to building the sorts of experiences and the sorts of understanding and the depth that's going to be required as you move, forward in your career, to where you're finally starting to weigh in on the more interesting issues, on the policy level issues or the strategic issues for the company or the agency, and how to manage risk abroad, whether it's on behalf of the U.S. government generally, or it's on behalf of a local operating headquarters, or a division headquarters in corporate America. So don't be put off. Sometimes when you arrive at day one, young officers on active duty sometimes, are really chomping at the bit to weigh in on, heavy discussions and heavy issues. And it takes a few years in your career until you have the sort of credibility to do so. So you're building those ideas and you're building the credibility on which to found those ideas. So I think you'll find yourself you know, again, creating that breadth of your own profile until you reach a position where now you're standing, you know, among the policymakers with a higher level address. So that's good.
I have one note on that, Ron. I was going to mention that there are assignments within the State Department and other sectors of the federal government where you can go and get an advanced degree from like the Command General Staff College or the Navy War School, or you know, any number of the other armed forces schools. So there are opportunities for it, and it's sort of seen as a progression step. Again, to Lily's point, it's not necessary that you have it, but it certainly doesn't hurt to attain those, you know, more senior levels as you go forward.
Let's see if there's any, I think we've addressed it. Looks like, Carmen, you've put a couple of links together here as we draw kind of toward the end of our hour together. And so there's one from Middle East Studies certificate information and one from the IS major, of course, too. If you're not currently an international studies major, you need to think about it, right? So take a look at those links if you aren't currently benefiting from either program. There's some good information there. If you have specific follow-up questions too, you're welcome to email International Studies, whether it's Molly or Carmen there, or myself directly too. For those of you that know me, I'm pretty easy to find on campus or right now in my basement where I've been relegated. So you're welcome to send us, and Molly's put her email address there in the chat room for you, and I'll forward those to Tristan and Lily, and we'll see if we can get some answers, whether they are able to answer your questions or if they're able to find someone, or I am even, to put with you and get a good answer to your question that follows on. We are just about at the end of our time together, so this has worked out pretty well. I've got some thank yous, of course, as you would expect. First of all, again, and I mean this very sincerely, I really do want to thank both Tristan and Lily for giving their time to us. They're in a different time zone, each of them. You can tell by Lily's window. She's worked with us right into her dinner hour, and Tristan, you have too. I'm expecting your family to come busting through that the door behind you any moment, saying it's dinner time, so we better let you go. But this was when I called and asked both of them if they would participate with us without a moment's question. They didn't hesitate and threw their hat right in the ring for the University of Wisconsin. I hope we're able to host both of you out here in person someday for a short conference, a very small conference, so I don't have to deal with a lot of people. And you'll find yourself out on the terrace with us, hopefully in better times. So I appreciate both of you. Carmen, thank you for working the IT end of this. That is greatly appreciated in supporting the hour together. And again, back to our sponsors, the International Studies major, the Middle East Studies program, the African Studies program, and IRIS itself, the Institute for Regional and International Studies, as a national resource center. We've got so many opportunities here at UW-Madison in the international division to pursue whether it's regional or a thematic study on an international level. So we're grateful for that, and I really encourage all of you to make good use of the resources and opportunities, whether it's study abroad or internships or whatever it might be, learning experiences, to really create that international resume that you want to graduate with, so you can compete for some of these wonderful opportunities like Lily and Tristan did as they entered the workforce. Lily, again, thank you very much. One last parting thank you, and Tristan as well. And with that, Carmen, thank you to the audience too. I almost let you get away without that. We appreciate you participating. You've made this a really rewarding experience for all of us. So thanks for coming tonight and sharing this time with us. Look for further events like this. We hope this series will continue to the point where you get tired of seeing us, and we put you with so many different career paths, and hopefully put more tools in your toolkit as you get closer to graduation. These are competitive times, so you need every lever that you can pull on your way into the professional workforce. So thanks very much, Carmen, unless you have anything else tonight. All right, thank you. Have a great evening. And we've got Tristan and Lily on their way to dinner at 6:15 p.m.